Good afternoon and welcome to the 845th Governance, Administration and Committee meeting. Today, lovely to see you, Councillor Taylor. We welcome the Acting Mayor, Deputy Gates, Acting Mayor Gates as the Mayor's representative on the committee today. We'll start with the minutes. There's no apologies, no leaves of absence, so confirmation of the minutes. Anyone like to move that? Councillor Fowler and seconder? Councillor Curtis, thank you. All in favour? Great, thank you. We'll look at the items. There are 2 starred items. Does anyone wish to unstar or star any items? No, okay. So 5.1 and 6.2 we will remain starred. Someone happy to move those items? Councillor Wilkinson, seconded Councillor Gates, all in favour? Thank you. So we will, Councillor Gates is in the role of acting mayor, representing the mayor today, so he's on committee. So 6.1, the city operational plan. Do we have any questions regarding this? No, we don't. I am happy to move that. Is anyone happy to second that item? Thank you, Councillor Martin. Yeah, I think that's fine as is. So, all in favour? Great, thank you. We now go to 6.3, Experience Gold Coast. Are there any questions regarding this one? Acting Mayor.
Thank you, and through you, Chair, I just wondered if I can have an understanding, please. When I saw that, I was a bit surprised, to be honest, that the services and funding agreement had been already signed off, because I was not sure about the changes that were made and why. So I got out the recommendation from our last committee meeting, and there's no change at the moment in regard to 13.6, but there is a change in the expenditure targets, which are highlighted in 2, the Schedule of 3 performance indicators. So there's a reduction from 10% down to 5%, and then there's a figure that's been inserted to reflect the growth in tertiary commencements that was not in the original report to Council too. So I got out the recommendation to be sure, and we didn't give approval for discretionary change, so I just wondered what gave rise to those changes within the service agreement and how it was signed without reference back to Council, given there were changes.
Through the Chair, so there was some discussions with the Board of EGC and the CEO regarding the, so there was, some discussion at budget time as part of Council's budget deliberations around setting the baselines for those KPIs, and we were waiting for data at the time, and that was the reason why we didn't have those finalised KPIs presented to Council as part of the budget process. Subsequent to that, there was some discussions with the EGC board and CEO regarding the tertiary issues with international students and that they were unreasonable targets, and those discussions happened with our, need to swallow today. Sorry. Thank you, PC. So those discussions happened. The baselines were thought by both parties to be reasonable and attainable, given the change in international student arrivals and visa conditions. And then I think from that point, the CEO was able to sign off on the agreement under delegation.
Well, I understand that that's what's occurred, but the recommendation didn't provide for that. It provided for it to be agreed in terms of the attachment number that was provided to us. And I just would... Is it too late to ask that a new services and funding agreement be prepared? Because there's another change that I think we all missed that I would also suggest in an amended motion if it's appropriate. And the recommendation, it's on grey pages, so I'm not speaking about anything that's confidential, only to say that the recommendation referred to the services and funding agreement, which contains a clause in it about reporting back to council, and it's in the white pages today. So it requires EGC to report back to council, back to the CEO for any additional funding. It stipulates that no funding applications must be made to council, councillors or any entity of council without reference to the CEO. And my personal belief is that had councillors realised that, it was just in the fine print of the funding agreement, they would have preferred it to come back to council rather than the CEO, because the CEO sits on the board of Experience Gold Coast. And it would just provide, I think, a safer mechanism if it came back to council. So my question is, can a new services and funding agreement be prepared reflecting that any additional funding applications come back to council? And if you can explain to us the amended reduction down to 5%. I get the international tourists, there are issues, but it was silent. So why was 2% put in? I still don't understand that.
To that, I can speak more broadly. So I'll go back and double check on the resolution, Acting Mayor, to actually work back and actually make sure that there hasn't been a signing of the agreement in an inappropriate way. Happy to do that, and I can come back to you on that separately. In terms of the variation of the agreement itself, it is a contract, which means council in and of itself does not have the power to unilaterally change the contract now by virtue of just resolving the matter. But what we can do is certainly look at what those variations might look like, and we can negotiate with the other party on settling those. In that particular instance, I can speak to that clause specifically, and whilst I can understand perhaps where the view might be that there would be an attempt to restrict that engagement with councillors directly around funding, it was actually really the opposite. It was really trying to ensure that council had already undertaken the work to do some deep analysis of appropriate funding for EGC, and set that base funding over the longer period of the 5 years for the funding agreement, and really start to channel accountability through that one funding mechanism and push them through to deliver on that strategy in an aligned manner. When we have, and we have had ad hoc funding requests come through to councillors in the past, what happens is we're spreading that accountability, and there is this sort of artificial inflation in the level of funding that an entity receives, and then it makes it much more difficult for the city administration to be accountable to the council for that funding. So that was really an attempt to really start to channel that accountability to one central point, say to the entity, here's your funding, match it to your strategy. We've set the KPIs now, and you are now accountable to the council for delivering those KPIs, and we've given you base funding, which we consider is appropriate to deliver on those outcomes for council. That was really the rationale that went behind the provision.
I understand that, but can I just keep going for a minute? But we were referring to additional funding requests, weren't we, from the saved funds that were put aside, but that we agreed might be accessed for anything that was of particular interest to the city. And if we can't change the services and funding agreement, can we add to today that any funding applications in line with the services and funding agreement also be presented to council prior to sign-off?
Through the chair, we can certainly, your council's certainly free to narrow the way that we deliver on our obligations under that funding and services agreement. So that's possible.
I just think it's something we all, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's something we all have a very great interest in, because destination Gold Coast is gone, Experience Gold Coast is here, and we have really high hopes for what it can do for our city. And yes, I understand what you mean when you say we hope they'll stick to the funding provided and the strategy, but there were savings that were available, and if anything really exciting came forward, I think we'd all like to have the opportunity of knowing about it and perhaps influencing any additional funding consideration.
And sorry, if I may, I think with the response that you gave, it was saying to take it away. I've had a request to me as a councillor on an ad hoc matter, and I understand that that doesn't work. But I think deciding that decision-making power then goes to the CEO who is on the board, who effectively can make a decision with this hat on that hat whilst on the board, rather than coming to council, is the acting mayor's concern, and one that I share.
Could I make just a small comment through the chair? We can absolutely do that operationally, and the only thing I think might cause issues is when there's that timing issue where we do have to circle through. So it would just be those urgent requests where EGC has a great opportunity and there's a timeliness. That would be the only thing operationally that we might need to work through and come up with some type of lever where there might be a threshold question around value or investment, or the type of investment where we don't want to get in EGC's way in delivering or accessing great opportunities, would be my only sort of...
And I don't want to seem picky, but it's one line in a funding agreement that's, some 30 or 40 pages long at budget time, when we've probably all just looked at the recommendation, and it has no reference to it in the recommendation other than as in terms of the funding and services agreement. So I just, in having a look at that, I have a greater comfort with council actually being the decision maker, because we're the people that the people put in place to make those decisions.
I'd like to make another question or comment following on from Madam Acting Mayor, is with regard to the now specific requirement on education targets. This was one that I raised as a concern during the EGC budget deliberations, because my understanding is our council plan is our overriding document, and I've said I do think it needs a review, and it is explicit. Goodness knows why, it was a bit of an error, but it is explicit in terms saying that one of our targets is the growth in tertiary. So anything below the inflation rate is not growth. So I would suggest that number, not only did it not get agreed on in budget and was added afterwards, but it's in breach of the council plan. Sorry, another question, Councillor Martin?
Just a question, Chair, through you to Acting Mayor. I was just keen to understand, is it the discretionary fund that where you were referring to wanting those applications come back to council? Because I'm sort of looking at the service and funding, and it does, I think it's page 50,
Sorry, Councillor, I was referring to page 51, the other council funds, where it refers EGC must not apply for or accept funding from councillors, council or any entity of council for additional funding outside this agreement without the approval of the Office of the Chief Executive Officer. And I mean, the Office of the Chief Executive Officer, no disrespect, but that could be anyone in that office. And I have more comfort with council making that decision rather than that terminology. And I know that in the original one, it was different. It said the Chief Executive Officer or his delegate. And I know it's splitting hairs, but I think we've made it clear we want things to come back to this council so that we're all totally aware of what's happening across the organisation.
So if I may ask, are you comfortable with that wording regarding that one?
Well, I'd like to be guided by the Executive General Manager because I don't want it to be at odds with the funding agreement, the services and funding agreement, which says the Office of the CEO. So maybe we need to say that funding applications under the services and funding agreement be presented to both the Office of the Chief Executive Officer and Council. I think that probably makes it more fitting. So,
or maybe that before the Office of the CEO provides a response, they seek guidance from council. I think that might work better if that's all right with you.
You go.
So if we, so any funding applications, the Office of the CEO seeks guidance from council.
Excuse me, through the chair.
No? I'm going to leave it with you. You create the wording.
Okay.
It's your thing.
That funding applications under the services and funding agreement be presented to council for consideration prior to sign off by the Office of the CEO.
Through the chair, thank you. Just to introduce myself quickly, my name's Emily Atkinson and I am the Coordinator of Controlled Entities. Do you mind if I just ask a clarifying question? So are we talking here about applications for discretionary funding?
No, we're talking about other council funds that we know are set aside.
Yes, so the 13.6.
Yes.
So specifically, there should be in the contract no further applications for funding. And the reason for that is, as the Chair explained before, so there's any funding applications outside the discretionary fund? Is that the...
If you refer to page 25 of your report, it says EGC must not apply for funding from councillors' council without the approval of the Office of the CEO. So what the Acting Mayor's concern is with is that the approval should not be with the Office of the CEO, it should be with council.
But it is, Chair, it is in the funding agreement. So where I'm trying to arrive here is not to be in breach of the funding agreement, but to ensure that council is informed. So
we're talking about two different things here, just to clarify. So the purpose of that clause was to say, Rosie, if you want additional funds for bleach, please don't go and, visit individual councillors. Why? Because council has provision funds. I think Deputy Mayor, what you're talking about is the discretionary fund. That's that additional provisional amount that council set aside at budget to say those fantastic things that you want to do over and above your base funding. So you're saying that's the stuff we want to see before they're approved. We don't want the CEO or the Office of the CEO in any approval capacity. So we can change those.
To be perfectly honest, I hadn't read the discretionary part. I stopped when I got to the other. And so, in all honesty, what I hope is that council has a role to play in any additional funding applications, whether it be through this mechanism or the discretionary funding, that council is informed before rather than, or earlier rather than later.
Through the chair, if you were comfortable, we could use the wording, any funding applications pursuant to the services and funding agreement. That will capture any additional funding that we provide to EGC, because there is no other mechanism by which council or the city administration could convey funding to the controlled entities. So that would clarify it.
Thank you.
If that made everyone.
I hope you don't think I'm being extremely picky, but I just think that it was something we overlooked as a body. Thank you.
Just have a question regarding, this is the white paper, right? Yes. Those key performance indicators, and I appreciate that it was, there was some negotiation that be had there. I had raised that concern about the tertiary commencements and growth, and that I felt that it was strange that we're forced in to do that, and that we do need a review of our council plan. But how can we put that in if it is in breach of our council plan?
Through the chair, there's Emily. It's a contract that's in place between council and a separate legal entity, which sits outside of, it's a separate legal relationship essentially. I understand the deliverable under the council plan, but the negotiations that took place, the view was we want to support EGC to deliver on those outcomes that are achievable, and that was what was considered to be appropriate in the circumstances given the landscape at the time.
Anything else on that one? No. Would you like to move that, Acting Mayor? Councillor Martin, second. Would you like to speak to it?
All incredibly pleased that Experience Gold Coast is moving in the direction it is, and that we've combined the funding from the amalgamation of entities to make sure that we put our best foot forward in attracting events to the city. And I know that we've all been so vitally interested in it that we also have a great interest in anything else that might come along that's a little bit out of the expected funding. And look, the air show was exactly one of those, where the entity before came back to council and said we're going to need more dollars to present this air show, and it was a bit of a gamble, but it came before council, and I think in hindsight it was a great decision to do so. And I mean, I'm not suggesting that there's going to be another application for something as big and bold as that, but I just know that the new councillors are vitally interested in being involved in the decision making at every level, and I think it's important that those sort of considerations come before the council so that we're fully aware. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We now go to 6.4, which is a response to the petition. The petition is to withdraw the sister city relationship with Netanya. We have received the recommendation report from officers. I may just start by reading out a little part of this report. Sister city relationships are typically long-standing relationships that sit outside of political cycle and political issues. They aim to promote people-to-people connections, grassroots diplomacy and community engagement. And council sister city relationships have been established to foster cultural, economic, educational and social exchanges between these two cities. It is acknowledged that the petitioners hold strong feelings about the City of Gold Coast's relationship with Netanya. However, the Sister City Agreement is a non-political, friendship-based agreement which does not give rise to the notion of complicity, nor is it an instrument that can be used to influence events outside the city's control. Therefore, it is the recommendation of city officers that the Sister City Agreement remains in place. Before we get to questions, I'm happy to move that. Do I have a seconder? Acting Mayor. Are there any questions or comments regarding that? No, okay, so we'll take a vote on that. All in favour? Thank you. We have a couple of general business items. Oh, sorry, have I missed one? No, we've done that. We started that one. So we're going to the general business items. We started that item, didn't we?
You didn't mention it.
Apologies. Okay. Happy to move that. The 7.1 quarter 4 report, rates and water debt management. Seconder, Councillor Martin. Pardon? It is starred, but I didn't note it when I noted all the starred items specifically. So we'll just for clarity, we'll note it now. So all in favour? Okay, thank you. Right, okay, so now we have some general business items. First one, council plan review, and I think as we just noted, it probably is time. There are some somewhat irregularities with our council plan, which creates situations like what we've just discussed now. But also this has not been reviewed with our new council, so it certainly makes sense that it's reviewed on a timely basis, and particularly when we've got a new council. So the recommendation is that a review of the council plan be brought to this committee within the next 12 months. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Martin. Question?
Can I just ask when it's due for review, please?
It's due. It expires in through you, Chair. It expires in 2027. However, there was a mid-term review for 25, so that's reasonable.
In
time.
line with that.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? All in favour? Great. Okay. Thank you. The next one, so we have gone through a pretty significant restructure. So back in the beginning of the end of 22, we made a temporary change to council decision making to enable our CEO to enact quite significant organisational changes. This would basically enable us to go back to what our decision-making was prior to that change for the restructure. The future organisational changes from manager upwards be brought back to council decision-making, given the major restructure is now complete. I'll move that. Is there a seconder? Yep. Yep.
I don't recall council being involved in organisational changes as such, only in restructures. So I know that we did give the approval to the CEO to make major changes across the organisation. It was one of the reasons that he was appointed to effect organisational change. But Can anyone sort of enlighten me on that? I'm not aware of the council actually being involved in organisational changes.
Through you, Chair. In my short tenure with the city, 2.5 years, we've been through a fair amount of change. However, like you, I'm not aware that that was brought through to council, other than potentially notes outside of council meetings.
I'm just not sure that from where I'm sitting today as acting mayor that it wouldn't be considered operational.
Well,
and so I'm loath to support that without getting a little bit more advice.
yeah. This is, if this refers to the resolution that was made on the 24th of May 2022, which I believe that you have, and in point 4, it stated, so these were the changes that were made to enable us to do the restructuring work. Point 4 of that resolution said that future organisational structure changes at the third level manager and below be delegated to the CEO subject to appropriate notification to council. So prior to that, that didn't happen. Prior to that, the recommendations would come to council.
I don't recall that.
We'll just leave this one.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm sorry to do that to you.
That's okay.
I don't.
That's okay. I might just leave it then. We'll leave it without a seconder and let it lapse.
I was just going to suggest if perhaps it was a review and advice prepared to bring back. So
That might be a better way
I'd
to
be
do it.
happy to support if there was a review of
Okay.
the organisational changes.
Okay. So maybe let's think about it. The purpose of the wording is that there was a way that council was informed about decision making prior, and we need to look at whether that's something we want to resolve and go back to, given it was presented as a temporary restructuring measure. So that a report be brought back on the organisational restructure, including decision making at council and CEO level. No, doesn't help. If you've got some other wording, you're welcome to put it up. Or if the...
If I could just, sorry, Chair, through you, ask a question. Was there special delegation or powers given for the major restructure that we are reviewing, or this is kind of a matter of course and operational?
Through you, Chair, I'm not too familiar with that. However, what we could do is, instead of bringing back the report, bring back a determination as to what the resolutions have said, so that we can categorically provide a clear definition or not without... Sorry.
If I could just contribute, Councillor Patterson, I think because we had the whole 1CP program, there were probably elements of that were brought forward for our determination where that point 4 may have existed as part of 1CP. I think we have an answer now.
Through you, Chair, that's correct. For me, in bringing back a determination would be defining organisational restructure as well, because whilst on the 1st of November, the restructure as far as the exec cohort was conducted, certainly to your point, through 1CP over the course of the last 18 months prior to that, there are a number of organisational changes that we did make. So again, it might just need a little bit of work. Rather than crafting something for a report, it might make more sense just to understand, maybe offline, what's required and what we can do, if that's okay. Yeah.
Just through to the Mayor's Chief of Staff, if you have something you'd like to to contribute, that would be great. Councillor Taylor?
Yeah, I was just going to suggest instead of doing a whole report for this, we maybe get some advice, early advice, and if down the track we feel we need to then dig a bit deeper, we could bring another general business to the table. But I feel operational matters is CEO, and creating another report for the administration at this point, pausing would be a better stance.
Mr. Wallace, did you want, if only if you wanted to add something? If not, no worries.
No, look, I think from what I've been listening in on, you've landed in the right position. Bring some advice back as to what used to happen and what happens moving forward. I do recall in years past structure reports, because I wrote some of them back in the old days from the branch manager level. So if we were deleting a branch or moving a branch from one department to another, those reports would come to council. But it's, I was out of the organisation for 8 years, and I think it's best, Madam Chair, that you get some advice on it, as the EGM has suggested.
Great. So we'll leave it for today.
Just a thought too, Madam Chair. I think some of the organisational restructure, I think, was relayed to us via a briefing rather than in a council meeting, if you recall, because of the operational nature. So I think that we really need advice.
Yeah, I think that would be useful. I'm really just going off that resolution of the impetus, and so we'll have a look at that. We can bring that back to the next one. This next one is related to the restructure, so that just lapses, right? Because we don't have a seconder on that one, so we'll just leave that one. Is that okay? So, or we can just withdraw it. Just withdraw the motion, you're saying, the recommendation.
It wasn't seconded.
No. Yeah. Then they have to withdraw it. Okay. The final one, I think it is worth, I think it's worth a broader review on the restructure, but certainly for us to have an understanding of the costs, so that a report be brought to the GAF committee outlining the costs of staff contracts during the restructure or since that date. Yes.
Sorry, do you mean for terminating staff or new staff coming on? I don't.
The cost of terminating staff contracts during the restructuring. Sorry. Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask what would be the purpose of that?
Well, it would be for us to understand there's been significant current and past staff who've raised matters on this, and I think it would be worth council just having eyes over it and understanding it. Councillor Taylor?
I'm just thinking through that there was a restructure. Part of that is termination of contracts.
Yes.
During the budget process, we looked at what was, how we've gained some savings in this space. There is commercial consideration, so I'm not really convinced that a report would bring back much to the table, but I'm interested in hearing from others.
Thank you, Chair. Just for my clarification on this, as part of our due budget process, would that not have been part of any efficiency measures made out in any particular section, potentially under strategy people, as far as saying cost shifting, in that we're adding staff in, but we're also then, through the restructure, obviously restructuring and changing positions. So would that not have been just kind of, I guess, manipulated somewhere in the data or the outcome of our final budget adoption anyhow, to a degree?
Through you, Chair. There's a number of variables that I would say, other than just efficiencies and fit for purpose and all the many things you could talk about. To answer your last part of the question, yes, it was in the budget. So exec contracts are a single line item in the budget that was adopted in June, and it talks to both previous year and the current year that we're now operating in.
It might be, and actually I think what it might be better as is we wrap this up with the previous one as well, and we create. I'll work, if it's all right. I'll work with Paul on it, and we'll just get some clarity on all that and bring it back. Thank you. Any other questions before we leave that one as well? No, Councillor Curtis.
Just since it's going to be wrapped up in the other one, and having heard both the impetus that led to it and the purpose, it does strike me as being dangerously close to meddling in the role of the CEO's office. So, like, is there a danger there if we're saying it's because we've heard of instances and our purpose is to wrap that up? That are we not crossing a line?
What line? Sorry.
Yeah, staffing matters that belong within the CEO's office.
I think, a specific. If we were talking about a specific staffing person, it would be. But I think we have an obligation to understand, if we set on the path of a major restructure, to understand all elements of that, and then it's if we think about when we started that, half the councillors who were here with the context for that are not here now. So understanding that original resolution, I think, would be useful. Understanding the impact of those things along the way would be useful. It's not I don't think it's a specific request, so I don't think that it does. Paul, have you got a comment?
Through you, Chair, no. I'm happy for you to let us know what you want. I think, and reiterate, that it's probably best to understand what we actually need first, and having that discussion with you, more than happy to, and then come back with what that recommendation might look like.
Very good. And if I wasn't dealing with a girl with pneumonia yesterday and myself, I would have got to this earlier, but thank you. So, okay, so we'll leave that one for the moment. Are there any other general business items? We'll leave that one. Yep. Lapse that one. Okay. Anything else? No? All good. Okay. I declare the meeting closed at 2:13. Thank you.